Welcome to another Charles Economy podcast. We have Dr. P.D.A. McCullough with us today. He's an MD. He's an ex cardiologist. And yeah, I think you've got on the spotlight pretty much with the COVID-19, Peter. So I'm glad to have you on today. You've been on various podcasts, so quite the authority on the subject here. Tell us a bit more about yourself and what you've been up to as of late.
Well, I'm so honored to make your show. So I have to tell you that this is fantastic, and yeah, I'm in practice in Dallas, Texas, as an internist, a cardiologist. I'm a research epidemiologist. I'm president of the McCullough Foundation, which is an independent organization involved in investigative scholarship, media. We're involved in the courts and public policy. And then I'm the chief scientific officer of the wellness company. So I wear many hats, and I've been very involved in pandemic response from the very beginning.
Right. Well, tell us what happened in 2020. What is COVID, right? COVID-19. Now that the heat is down and we can talk about it, right? Really, because it was another topic during the pandemic. It was quite hard to talk about it and not get the heat. But what happened, and what was your reaction to it?
Isn't it interesting how you have to couch the question that way, that we couldn't talk about this 6 years ago or 5 years ago? Can you think of any topic you could not talk about outside of this?
Yeah, I remember being having a suspension on my YouTube channel for talking about it back then. So that was quite weird.
Well, it's the first time we've ever had anything in our fields. I'm a doctor. I've never had something that's out of bounds in terms of research, innovation, publications. So in 2020, what we know now, based on investigations in the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, all our agencies, have weighed in. It's on their websites. What we know now is that the United States and the Chinese had engaged in the engineering of a very infectious virus, a human beta coronavirus that was modified with parts of a bat virus, with a specific part of the virus. And I want to show this to you, that right here, this is the virus. This part, the spike protein, this on the surface, this was modified. In a Chinese biosecurity lab, this spike protein being modified made it far more infectious and far more damaging and lethal to the human body. And as far as we can tell, it was intentional. It was intentional. The work may have started on this dating back to 2012 or so. And, two seminal papers came out in 2015 in Nature Medicine, and the second one in 2016, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And the first author was Menachery. The senior author was Barrick. And there were middle authors. And the second paper, the Chinese were included. And they called their creation a SARS-like Wuhan Institute of Virology 1 covirus, or CoV, poised for human emergence. So this was put out to the world. Many, like myself, I didn't read those papers. I wasn't paying attention. And before we knew it, in 2019 and 2020, people started getting sick.
And where were you at in your career back then in 2020, and what sort of got you to react to this?
I was a professor of medicine. I practiced both internal medicine and cardiology. I was on some of the task force committees for my hospital of how we should respond to a pandemic. So remember, for this pandemic and future ones, or other catastrophes, let's say a nuclear holocaust, or an Aspergillus bioterrorism attack. Remember, for all of these things, the front line is the doctors. We have to manage this. It's our responsibility. So when SARS-CoV-2 came in, it's like it became our responsibility to do something about it. And my thinking was, seeing what was going on early, that the way not to handle this is to wait for people to come into the hospital, that the hospitals would be overwhelmed. Hospital care didn't look like it was very effective. And like all infections, my thinking was that the best thing to do would be to identify the patients with the highest risk for hospitalization and death and do everything we can as early as we can to avoid hospitalization and death.
Right. And you went, I believe, on Joe Rogan in 2021. And then, yeah, shit started hitting the fan, I guess. A bunch of people labeled you as a conspiracy theorist. What was your emotional response to that back then? Was it hard for you, or did you fight even more once that happened?
Yeah, well, the chronology of this is that in 2020, I was the first to publish in a series of 2 papers an organized approach to treat patients early and reduce the risk of hospitalization and death. And it was copyrighted, the McCullough protocol. The first paper was published in the American Journal of Medicine. The second one was in Reviews in Cardiovascular Medicine. These are fully peer-reviewed, National Library of Medicine index cited. There's some of the most widely cited papers today in the pandemic. And, involved risk stratification, reducing contagion control, nasal sprays and gargles, nutraceuticals and supplements, and then the drugs available to use to treat the problem. And they included, generic medications. They included high-tech Operation Warp Speed products like monoclonal antibodies, Paxlovid, Molnupiravir. So as that occurred through 2020, if you were to look on my Wikipedia page, it was sparkling. I had a well-recognized academic career. I was the most published person in my field about the interface between heart and kidney disease. I had lectured all over the world. And so my Wikipedia page was fine. In fact, it was fine through my U.S. Senate testimony in 2020, November 19th, 2020, where I brought the news to the world that we can treat COVID-19. This was the most welcome piece of news. People were suffering with this. They wanted to know an approach. And in fact, I had published it. So everything was fine until 2021. And when 2021 happened, the vaccines rolled out. I expressed my concerns about them under oath while answering questions in the Texas Senate Health and Human Services hearing. Tucker Carlson invited me on his show, and I went on the long program, and that sent Tucker. He just couldn't believe what was happening. I told him that early treatment protocols of all types and all types of drugs were being actively suppressed. I told him that Harvard didn't have a treatment protocol of how to handle patients with outpatient COVID-19. Neither did any of the lead organizations in the world. We were more than a year into this. Can you imagine a major medical center having no outpatient treatment protocol of any type? And then towards the end of 2021, then I was invited on Joe Rogan. So, Joe Rogan was about 2 years late into this. But by that time, we had a wealth of data, on the big controversies, the suppression of effective early multi-drug treatment, the interference by government state actors in the community standard of care and the practice of medicine, and then this overwhelming push for mass vaccination at all costs.
Right. Okay. So for the audience here, the hypothesis is that this virus escaped from a Wuhan lab, whether that was accidental or not. Then the suppression of more effective treatments, and then the push of the vaccine en masse. So why do you think would the government push all these vaccines? There's been like a bunch of conspiracy theories about Bill Gates and people profiting from this, so why would the government do this? Because in my opinion, it's the most common quote unquote cure to that. That's what we've been using for decades, vaccines now, and they're sort of proven, right, with time. So what is your take on it?
Well, we had never had a global pandemic in modern times. There was one in 1918. That was the Spanish flu pandemic, and it largely ran its course and finished in about 2 years. There was an attempt at trying to give some serum and a very, very minimal attempt at a vaccine back then. So we had never attempted mass vaccination into a widely prevalent pandemic. You're right, vaccines have come in the past, but always when the disease was essentially gone or nearly gone. And that happened for measles and for polio and diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis. So when the disease is essentially gone because of improvements in sanitation and water supply, or illnesses go away because of antibiotics like diphtheria and tetanus, pertussis, then vaccines come in. But we'd never, in the heat of, we're talking a widely prevalent pandemic. The estimates are 97% of people got this illness. 97%. We had never attempted vaccination. And on top of that, we'd never attempted vaccination with novel genetic products. So products that produce the genetic code for the lethal part of the virus. So I published an op-ed in August of 2020 in The Hill, which is a widely read journal for the House, the Senate, White House, political people read this. And the title of the op-ed was The Great Gamble of the COVID-19 Vaccine Development Program. The reason why it was a gamble is that it had never been done before. These were brand new mechanism of vaccines. No one knew how long the genetic code would last, what would turn it on, what would turn it off. No one knew, what would happen with an uncontrolled production of the potentially lethal spike protein in the body. No one knew. And I questioned it, because if a disease, an infectious disease, is very prevalent or common, if we use an antibiotic or a vaccine or another intervention, most likely the virus will just mutate and get around it. It'll become resistant. That's the reason why we wouldn't give the same antibiotic to everybody in the hospital. The bacteria would become resistant. So many were claiming that this was such a bad idea to begin with. We should never vaccinate into a widely prevalent pandemic. Now, during 2020, I was the co-principal investigator of a research vaccine program, and it was called the Imodulon vaccine. And I remember making the presentation to Operation Warp Speed, the FDA and the NIH, and I said, listen, if we're going to vaccinate, my view on this is at max 2.7 million Americans. Those in nursing homes, congregate living settings, the people taking care of them, very high-risk people. Because the illness was so mild for the rest of the population. And we already had data that the survival rate was 99.9999%. We should never vaccinate the entire country, because if there are side effects and any large number of doses are given, we're going to have a large number of people with problems.
Right. Yeah. And okay, so for the RNA technology, I believe it was deployed because, people were desperate, right? And they wanted a quick fix, sort of. And I think that the vaccines were the quickest way to get there. I think the mortality rate back then that was promoted in the media was like 3 to 4% once you have it. Why do you think this happened the way it did? Because I can certainly see that media created mass hysteria, right? And that could justify the fact that immune systems were weakened, people were living in fear, people were isolated, which I think was over the top. And I think media was definitely a symptom of that, like just mass spreading falsehoods about COVID. And we would see like all these videos of quote unquote healthy people dying from COVID. That I can certainly see. Have you seen some part of this caused by just mass hysteria? And was the 3 to 4% mortality rate like accurate back then?
No, the mortality rate was grossly overstated. And messenger RNA wasn't the only option. In fact, the Chinese made a killed virus vaccine. They cultured the virus and they killed it, just like, we would have an influenza vaccine, much safer option. We had Novavax, which made just a small dose, 5 micrograms of the spike protein. I had presented the Imodulon vaccine, which is a cell-based vaccine similar to the BCG vaccine used for tuberculosis. So we had many options. We definitely did not need to pick messenger RNA or adenoviral DNA, and we didn't need to feature them. Our agency shouldn't have shown preference of one over another. That was another thing that was concerning. But how the mortality came out was the following, and we know this retrospectively. The current statistics indicate 1.2 million Americans died and they were test positive for COVID. Now, it doesn't mean they died of COVID, and it meant they could have been test positive at any time during the pandemic. So someone could have been test positive in early 2020 and died at the end of 2021. It was counted as a COVID death. Okay. So the National Center for Health Statistics, the last time they put out a report in 2023, half of those COVID deaths had no pneumonia recorded anywhere in the chart. May have fallen and had a hip fracture, motor vehicle accident. 40% of the deaths were people who are beyond their life expectancy. So they were very, very old. And it's my estimate that if adjudication was done, if we actually looked at these deaths, reviewed every one of them, looked at the x-rays and all the clinical notes, probably 10% of that 1.2 million were truly COVID deaths. I had one in my practice, and I can tell you for sure he died of COVID. So we're looking at 120,000 deaths. So it's probably grossly overstated. The Italians have published on this. They think only 3% of their COVID positive deaths actually died of COVID. So no, mortality rate was not 3 to 4%. It was grossly overstated by authorities. And I agree with you. There was a whole panoply of fear-based messages that were largely encouraging patients to get vaccinated as their only chance.
Yeah, that was ridiculous. Like straight up, like me, I'm not like on the conspiracy theory side of things, but I'm definitely a biohacker and I'm a libertarian. And I remember that back then, to travel back to my native Canada, I had to get vaccinated. So that was total fucking bullshit, right? Like why obligate that on me? Why impose that on me? And yes, there are side effects to vaccines. I wouldn't say life-threatening, but I want to hear you on that. What were the side effects of the vaccine? What have you seen in patients? What are the statistics?
Well, I have to tell you, my great concern, I'm a doctor, and I tell you, I didn't take the vaccines. They were not safe enough. Even if I had to travel, I wouldn't take them. And yes, life-threatening and death is a big side effect of the vaccines. Big. And this isn't a conspiracy theory. The conspiracy theory really doesn't apply in this conversation. This is a rational theory based on data. So the Pfizer 90-day post-marketing report, the Pfizer report, they were the first vaccine rolled out in December 10th, 2020. They recorded 1,223 deaths directly after taking the Pfizer vaccine. That is a large number of deaths. Pfizer should have pulled it off the market at 5, 10, 15, no more than 50 deaths. But 1,223, that's a lot of people dying. Our CDC right now has recorded in the vaccine adverse event reporting system, of which doctors like myself are the major reporters, because these are cases where we believe the vaccine has caused the death. They're up to, at this point in time, they're up to 19,400 vaccine deaths certified by the CDC. I mean, these are astonishing numbers. About 1,200 of these deaths occur, on the same day they take the shot. And then another 1,200 occur the next day. And in the Open VAERS data report, there's a frequency histogram. So when you took those shots, Charles, you really took a risk with your life. You could have died right there.
Yeah, I was sick really bad for, I think it was 3 weeks. Was it after, or before? I can't remember, but yeah, I think I had to take like two mandatory, and I just took one at least. Like that's the thing. I'm a healthy guy as well, and my parents and a lot of close ones, when they got vaccinated, they got real sick, and that's pretty bad. I think at least they should prepare people for that. Hey, you're gonna get sick. Here's the protocol once you're sick, like to boost your immune system. But yeah, I think people weren't prepared for that, and yeah, I do think the percentage is sort of low of people that could have died, and I think COVID was 5 to 25x more lethal than the flu vaccine. So, do you think that in the end the benefits of the vaccine outweighed the negative side effects of it?
No, they didn't. Remember, the outcomes that matter are hospitalization and death. We all got COVID. Did you get COVID?
Yeah, I got COVID. I got real sick for 2 weeks at least. It was pretty bad.
Yeah. So the goal was for you not to be hospitalized and not die. That's the goal. Since we all got COVID, the vaccine obviously didn't stop COVID. It didn't work in stopping COVID. So the goal was to reduce hospitalization and death. And when we examine the prospective, double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trials, the vaccines never reduced hospitalization and death. They were equal for vaccine and placebo. And in the non-randomized studies, there are no valid studies that have shown that vaccines independently reduced hospitalization and death. They essentially didn't work. And so, the CDC was keeping track of vaccine hospitalizations and deaths, and they were pouring in. And by May of 2021, they just stopped reporting. They stopped recording it. They stopped reporting. And then in August of 2021, our CDC director came out and said the vaccines are not stopping transmission of the virus. So they didn't stop transmission of the virus. They didn't stop people getting COVID, since we all got it. And they didn't reduce hospitalization and death. The vaccines did not save millions of lives. So you can imagine any side effects, like getting sick for 3 weeks that happened like you and your parents, any side effects, far outweigh any theoretical benefits.
But couldn't we argue in the way of placebo effect? Like the population, most of the time they just want to believe in one solution, right? And the vaccine is like, oh, you got your vaccine, now you're fixed, and then it sort of stopped the mass hysteria. And when you're government, sometimes you need to do that, unfortunately, because a lot of the population is not educated and they want a solution, they want a mental fix. Do you think that the placebo effect provided more beneficial effects than not?
No, what provided beneficial effects was McCullough protocol, early treatment protocol. People saw the vaccines weren't working, so the vaccine's not going to reassure them. What reassured them is if they had treatment. So if they got early treatment and they got through the illness, as people did in 2020, where there was no vaccines, and in 2021, that's what they wanted. So if the government wanted to win confidence from the public, they should have been talking early treatment the entire time.
And I think we can both agree that the government was ill prepared for that. If there's another pandemic that strike, what should be done instead?
Well, remember, governments don't treat patients. And as we started out, I said, listen, in the setting of, let's say, a nuclear holocaust, the government's going to be useless. The doctors have to treat patients, just like with COVID-19. The government didn't treat patients. The CDC or NIH, FDA, they didn't treat a single patient. It was doctors like myself in the community. So, what governments need to do in the setting of a health crisis is they need to call experts, in our case, into Washington, of doctors who have figured out how to handle the problem. Get these best ideas, best practices, get them rapidly tested and promulgated. I did that with the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons, and the McCullough Protocol became, the only evidence-based, consensus-driven, society-supported home treatment guide. And we promulgated that, all over the United States and the world. If you go to aapsonline.org, you can see the COVID-19 home treatment guide. That if our U.S. government, could do this over again, they should have said, listen, it took about 6 months, but Dr. McCullough and his team, they figured out how to do it. We're going to go with this, and then we'll add additional drugs as they come in. A role could have been there for vaccines, but it would be, again, about 2.7% of the highest risk population. We'd never expose someone like you to the vaccines because you have a negligible risk of hospitalization and death. And if you got the vaccine, you're in the age group where we now know the vaccines cause fatal heart damage.
Right. And the McCullough protocol, is it scalable? Like, how would you do that at scale? Would you just ship zinc, vitamin C, and D to multiple millions of people's door? Is that like economically feasible via a vaccine?
Oh, for sure. I mean, in Uttar Pradesh, India, one of the biggest states, they put together treatment kits of ivermectin, azithromycin, vitamin D, budesonide. They did that in Honduras. Countries all over the world created treatment kits. I ultimately helped found the wellness company, United States-based company, operates on the world. Now we have home treatment kits with all the pre-prescribed drugs. So treatment kits were far more affordable and far safer than giving a brand new genetic vaccine.
Let's also talk real quick. Let's keep on shitting on the government because I think they're really messed up. The social isolation and the masks. That was like total BS in my opinion, and in the research that has come out. So tell me a bit more about why this was just mostly bad move. I mean, the mask to not spread the disease, that was okay, but a bunch of people started believing that it would help them prevent getting the thing. And then the social isolation, sure, you don't spread, but you just become crazy and the immune system is totally suppressed. Then you're just more susceptible. So tell us about why these two things didn't work.
Well, Charles, what's the Spanish word for 45?
45.
There you go. So, that's the root word of quarantine. Quarantine, 45. So that comes from the days of yellow fever, even Spanish flu, a quarantine, in that case, for 45 days. So a quarantine, that's tried and true. Quarantine worked to reduce the spread of smallpox and yellow fever, whatever. But importantly, we quarantine people who are sick, not quarantine healthy people. Healthy people can't spread the disease because they don't have it. So that was the complete government insanity all over the world. For the first time, a quarantine was applied to the wrong people. It should be quarantine for those who are sick, and healthy people get outside and continue their lives. So we never should have shut down the world. We never should have locked down. People who are sick should stay at home until they recover. I mean, that was completely insane to quarantine healthy people. It just never had been done before. Masks. Now, as a doctor, I wear a mask in the hospital, for the following reasons. If I have a vulnerable patient in the hospital or in the operating room, and I cough or sneeze, it could potentially block some of the staphylococcal bacteria from going on to the patient in the wound. But we don't wear masks to try to stop viruses. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. I mean, even in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, they didn't rely on a mask. I mean, they were wearing essentially hazmat suits, these impervious suits. So right. to ask anyone to wear a mask was foolhardy. So you can see quarantining healthy people and wearing masks was just right in the same list with, genetic vaccines in everybody, down to 6-month-old babies. These were signs that our government pandemic response was completely off the rails.
Right. And even quarantine historically, I believe you're Irish. I certainly have 25% Irish in my blood. And in Canada, we isolated a bunch of Irish immigrants on an island. A bunch died. And that's not just in that part of the world. It's pretty much everywhere. I think what the government should have talked about as well is the psychological effects of it all, right? Like having a mask, you feel more compressed, right? Like and then you learn that hospitals are full, so that even if you get sick, you cannot be taken care of. That's another psychological effects, and just how the government talked to people and what was spread out there. Have you studied the psychological effects of it all and how a bunch of people panic and just mass hysteria ensued, and a bunch of people just died because they mentally they were just suffocating.
Yeah, I haven't studied it, but others have, including Dr. Scott Atlas, who was in the White House with President Trump at the time. Scott Atlas and I were the two doctors selected to write op-eds in the Hill, that Washington Journal, for the first year of the pandemic. And what I've learned from him is that 60% of the businesses that were shut down in the pandemic, they never reopened. So it's not just getting nervous. It's not just panicking. It's losing your livelihood, losing your job, taking financial losses. These businesses had leases, they had buildings, they had equipment, they had personnel. This was devastating to quarantine healthy people and shut down businesses. You mentioned the quarantine of the Irish. It's essentially any ship that came to port that could have yellow fever. So, there were ships that came in through New Orleans and Philadelphia and all the port cities, in smallpox, in the smallpox outbreaks, quarantine works. A sick kid with smallpox, you don't have them play with other kids and spread around smallpox. So, quarantine of sick people is reasonable. Initially, our CDC said 14 days. I got COVID-19 in 2020. I followed the guidelines. I stayed out of the hospital and the clinic for 14 days. Now the CDC has learned that it's over within about 5 days. The current guidance said, listen, stay away from people for 5 days. If your fever is gone, your symptoms are controlled, go back. But the government response was so poorly articulated, and it was done so all over the world. So the same mistakes were replicated over 190 countries. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah, it's pretty insane. And then not only as a business owner, right? And we know that businesses are mostly in charge of the economy, but you would go to the stores and then there would be no more paper, no more water. It was just mass hysteria, and people were so stressed, And I think it's the first time that we get this in the age of social media, which is my hypothesis of what really happened. You mentioned that, the government is just not prepared for this, if doctors are, and if companies nowadays are quite efficient at managing these crises, or do you actually think that a company can manage this crisis more than a government? If that happens again, could there be like a company, for example, like yours, the McCullough protocol, that could actually deal with that, and that would have the sufficient supply chain to deal with all of that? How could we actually prevent this from happening or deal with it? Because in my opinion, it will happen again.
Yeah, I think it will. All of those involved in the pandemic at a high level, Anthony Fauci, the World Economic Forum, World Health Organization, Bill Gates, they all say there's going to be another pandemic, disease X. All the experts believe, just like SARS-CoV-2, it's going to come out of a biosecurity lab where there's a leak, where more of these infectious agents are going to happen. So you're right, it's going to happen. The answer is a company like the Wellness Company that is at scale to treat the country. Yes, that's the answer. Upscaling production of treatment kits, getting them out to high-risk patients, getting them by telemedicine, starting treatment. That's the way to go. Not lock healthy people down, masks, social distancing, and have them wait for a year, and then tell them to get in line for a dangerous vaccine. That was absolutely terrible. It's always treatment first, vaccine last.
But it seems you just don't have the infrastructure to treat all these people, is my point, right? And in Canada and US, the public system is very much in charge of treating people. So let's say that I would have an AI to predict a pandemic from happening very early on, right? And I would start as a private company, a legal place in which I could treat people. I believe the Mayo Clinic, for example, is private, right? Could I treat people at scale, make money while actually treating people and preventing this bad stuff from happening, aka probably offering my treatments at a very low cost, ship supplement to people, treat them at their houses. What would be like a private solution for a libertarian like me, someone that doesn't really believe in the government to solve shit up? Like, what would be a scalable solution to treat the next pandemic?
Well, keep in mind, our government spent tens of billions of dollars. Can you imagine if you had tens of billions of dollars? We have 1 million doctors in the United States. We have 500,000 nurse practitioners and PAs. We have 2,000 acute care hospitals, 5,600, extended range hospitals. And I gave you a huge budget like that. For sure, you could organize things. For sure, we could execute at scale. For sure, without a doubt. And we would have saved lives. I've testified under oath that early treatment would have saved 85% of those lives lost. The vaccine didn't save a single person.
Yeah, that's controversial, but do you feel that the next solution, that the solution that I would describe would be like telemedicine, right? In which I could talk to the patient on a daily basis. A good deal of it would be reassuring them, right? And telling them the basics, just giving them access to a plausible source of knowledge, a scientist, a doctor that would be like, hey, here's what you need to do. They could chat with me. They could possibly chat with an AI as well and be like, hey, this is normal that you feel that way. Just keep on. Yeah, and I would certainly prescribe them like alternative medicines, right? Like meditation for sure, and keeping their shit together, like a lot of psychology for sure. Do you believe that it would be telemedicine rather than sending them to infested and stressful hospital?
Well, that's exactly what happened. So, when the McCullough protocol was published in August of 2020, that was the breakthrough. Then the Association of American Physicians and Surgeons made that their featured protocol. Telemedicine companies were spawned all over the place. Another group, which is Natural in Medicine, the Frontline Critical Care Consortium, FLCC, they arose. American Frontline Doctors arose, and those doctors deployed telemedicine, in a robust fashion, and that's what treated the country. That's what limited mortality. So that's exactly what happened. So you can imagine, and those groups did not have any government contracts, none. The government was blowing billions of dollars on vaccines, masks, and hand sanitizers and PCR tests, and the government was not investing in early treatment response. So yeah, you're right on target. You don't have to hire, you don't have to create, you can use the existing resources. I mean, people have asked, where was Harvard in all this? Where was the Mayo Clinic? The Mayo Clinic didn't treat a single sick COVID patient to help them, avoid hospitalization and death. And you're right, the hospitalization is far too late.
Right. I think I would also send people, like not touching other humans. There's like science into that, and not shaking hands and not spitting in their face, right? I think I would also send them in nature, right? Like, and have some kind of app to tell them like, hey, go have a nice walk in the woods with your loved ones, and stop being so sedentary. Which brings me to the next point. A bunch of people that died from COVID had comorbidities, and how can we outsource health to actually not outsource health to the system, and actually bring back the accountability of health into Americans, into Canadians, into citizens themselves, so that they actually start taking care of themselves and stop outsourcing it to the system, and just drink Coca-Cola on a daily basis, eat McDonald's, being stressed and so toxic, and ultimately be like, hey, government, please save me. How can we stop that?
I think that's a great question. Now, in terms of getting outside, that was part of the very first McCullough protocol. As I said, open the windows, air out the house, get outside. It's called reducing contagion. Do you know to this day, governments don't advise patients to do that?
Yeah, that's crazy.
I mean, that shows you how far off they are. They don't even understand the fundamentals. In Singapore, they did the studies. The virus did not transmit outside. You know, during the pandemic, when they held the Super Bowl, that's where Tom Brady and the Tampa Bay Bucks won. You know, they didn't let people into the stadium. You know, when they
Right,
had
but a stadium is quite like, isn't it like a super spreader, like a stadium?
well, it's wide open to the air. You know, and people were worried. There was a commentary that they were going to let 100 vaccinated people into the stadium. I mean, the vaccines didn't stop spreading the virus. What they wanted to do something innovative at that time. They could have said, listen, people who already had COVID, they already had the illness. Remember, natural immunity held up until December of 2021. I already had COVID. I could have easily gone to the Super Bowl and been at zero risk.
Yeah, that whole idea of like the government imposing stuff on people is pretty crazy. Like, especially if you attack like libertarians, they're just gonna rise up, you know. Like ultimately, that's how like the U.S. was formed, you know, and that's always dangerous when you actually do that. Let me ask you a couple of personal questions. When people started attacking you and your reputation, how did you react to that? Like, what was your frame of mind, because people were attacking you pretty seriously back then?
Well, the attacks were always anonymous, which makes it a challenge. You know, like I say, my Wikipedia page was fine, and I was quickly locked out of my Wikipedia page. And this anonymous Wikipedia editor named the Altman, who I don't know who this person is, you know, he did 275 edits on my Wikipedia page.
And what's the system for people to actually accept that? Is it like Wikipedia peer reviewed, or is it like a bogus system?
No, it appears to be just defamation is what it is. People can write anything they want to write. So if you look over my Wikipedia page, it says COVID misinformation. And, you know, without misinformation being defined, remember misinformation came into the English language about 1500, and it was used extensively during the communist regimes, Nazi Germany and post-World War II Stalinist Russia. It's a propaganda term. You would never want to use that term. It's really a dirty word. And yet it's all over my Wikipedia page. And, you know, the government, the Federal Trade Commission, for instance, had misinformation policies. Some states, you know, created laws about COVID misinformation. American Board of Internal Medicine and American Board of Medical Specialists had, and again, it can't be defined. If you look at, let's say, the American Board definition, it says that misinformation is anything that doesn't agree with a consensus-driven narrative. Well, what's the problem with that? Well, early in a pandemic, there is no consensus. No one knows what's going on. Just like if there was a radiation accident early on, no one's going to know. It takes a long time for, you know, consensus to congeal, and there's always evolving evidence. Do you know in 1950, the consensus was that smoking was safe. That was the consensus. And it was considered controversial if you said smoking caused lung cancer. Remember I said the vaccines didn't reduce death, and you said that's controversial. It's the same thing back 1950. It's the same thing. So someone in the minority of opinion is immediately deemed spreading misinformation or controversial conspiracy theorist. Turns out smoking causes lung cancer, and the majority were wrong. Turns out COVID-19 vaccination did not save lives. Did not. And there's no evidence that it saved lives. So it's a false narrative. Just like masking was a false narrative. Just like quarantine healthy people is a false narrative. Why would you not think it's a false narrative?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of evidence, though, that evidence might be revisited, that it saved a bunch of people. And Like the fact that
None. You can't cite a single valid source of evidence. I mean, that's the problem. People who have taken the vaccine, you want to believe that it did some good to your body. And see, it's an inherent bias. It's a psychological bias. It's hard to overcome.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I thought I did my homework on that and the vaccine actually being. Let's see what ChatGPT said. I mean, ChatGPT is pretty. It's authentic.
No, ChatGPT on everything is just regurgitating the false narrative.
Right, and the sources like Wikipedia for sure. Tell me about the WHO program because the WHO is quite controversial nowadays. Like, is it scientific? Does it have an agenda? What's your opinion on it?
Well, I'll just give you one WHO exercise during the pandemic. So when the virus was emanating from Wuhan, the WHO decided to do an investigation, which they're supposed to do. And Rear Admiral Brett Gerard in the United States nominated 3 independent U.S. scientists. The WHO rejected those U.S. scientists, and they wanted Peter Daszak. Well, Peter Daszak was heading the EcoHealth Alliance. He had been to the Wuhan lab many, many times, and he was part of a co-conspiratorial team that created SARS-CoV-2. This has all come out in the U.S. House of Representatives inquiry. So the WHO selected one of the people who created the virus to go to Wuhan and investigate. And then you know what Daszak told the WHO? He says, I don't know where this virus came from, but it didn't come from the lab. So the WHO was early on part of the cover-up. And when Anthony Fauci was scrambling to try to cover up the lab origins of SARS-CoV-2, the lead scientist at the Wellcome Trust in the UK, Jeremy Farrar, helped him, create this false narrative, and with a group of doctors publish some false papers that said that the virus came out of nature. Guess where Jeremy Farrar is right now? He's the lead scientist at WHO. So you can see how I am slicing through these false narratives like a knife through butter. It's so easy.
Right. It's interesting for sure. Now, how should do you feel you've done a good job at spreading good information on the Joe Rogan show, for example? Like, how should a scientist, a doctor like you, spread the information, and is hitting up Joe Rogan the best strategy, aka reach as many people as possible? How should you spread that knowledge, basically, because you have a responsibility at the end of the day, right?
Right. So I'm as we sit here today, I'm one of the most peer-reviewed published doctors on the pandemic. So first and foremost, it's through the peer-reviewed literature. It's peer-reviewed for a reason. The peer-reviewed helps create the validity and the scientific underpinnings so it can contribute to the advancement of medicine. That's first and foremost. Now, the McCullough protocol is published in the American Journal of Medicine, one of the most widely read, respected medical journals in the world. So, I mean, first and foremost, it's the peer-reviewed literature. And when I go on podcasts, and they're always by invitation, you can tell the audience, I didn't email you to get on your show. I didn't call up Joe Rogan to get on his show. It's only if somebody asks me. Now, you're pretty late into the pandemic. And, I thought Joe was late at 2 years. You're kind of late at 5 or 6 years. But, I will talk to anybody. I was asked by a little 10-year-old boy in Germany to go on his podcast around 2021. And I said, how many people listen to your podcast? He goes, about 10 of my friends. And I went on his podcast. So, I'm a frequent contributor in the major media in the United States. I could be on primetime TV tonight. They could probably text me right now when I get off, I'll check. That's common. That's what I do. What I do is I come on the media. I'm prepared. I cite the peer-reviewed literature. I know it cold. I've testified multiple times in the U.S. Senate, U.S. House of Representatives, European Parliament, and I am laser precise. Those propagating the false narrative never cite the literature, can't find the evidence, and simply are putting out false information, like vaccines save lives, without any support. I'll tell you what saved lives during the pandemic. The first is people getting COVID, like me. A third of us got it in 2020. It's over with. Natural immunity was far and away the single greatest factor that made the next case of COVID become less severe. The second factor was early treatment, and people got early treatment, like Joe Rogan and Aaron Rodgers, and so many people, thank goodness, got the McCullough protocol. So did President Trump. He got early treatment. You can just see time and time again. And then the third factor is the virus mutated to be a far weaker virus. And so when the vaccines rolled out, by that time, the virus is far weaker. And so there was no way the vaccines saved lives. That's the reason why the randomized trials show the vaccines didn't save lives. That's the reason why there's no valid observational studies. And that's the reason why the package inserts approved by the FDA and the EMA and all the regulatory agencies, they don't tell people that the vaccine save lives. It's not a claimed benefit of the vaccine. If the vaccines truly save lives, they would put that in that FDA document for sure, but they don't.
Yeah, they're probably very careful with that. They could be very much sued if they would put that claim. Not sure if there's lobbying, right, and there's extracurricular organization that do promotes that, but it's been quite insightful chat, John. Peter, definitely put a dent in my brain, and will have you revisit some of my facts and data and opinions on that. So where can people find out more information about you, Peter?
Well, follow me on Twitter. I've got one of the top doctor accounts. My podcast, Pulse on Wednesdays, America Out Loud Talk Radio on Saturday and Sunday, 2 p.m. Eastern. My Focal Point Substack, the leading biomedical Substack. I've got 2 books out. Check those out. You can find them on my website, petermcculloughmd.com. And of course, support McCullough Foundation, mcculloughfnd.org, the leading not-for-profit organization bringing medical truth. That's the reason why you have me on. I'm Dr. Peter McCullough. Thanks for having me.
That was Peter and Charles for another Charles